Hollywood heartthrob Burt Lancaster seemed almost too good to be true, an impossibly handsome leading man who could both beguile audiences and project an aura of confident masculinity. Yet 6 years after his death, the release of declassified FBI documents would send new shockwaves through the legacy he left behind. Those files hinted at concealed truths, secret fears, and whispered accusations that not even the luminous glow of his fame could keep hidden forever. In the rigid 1950s, when Lancaster rolled in the surf for From Here to Eternity and unveiled a physique as taut as a modern runway model's, he shattered traditional notions of male decorum on screen. Word spread that he was too liberated, too sensual for that era's comfort. Rumors took flight. Was he gay? Did he indulge in hedonistic soirees far from the public eye? Was this all-American star secretly flirting with communist ideology under Hollywood's glamorous veneer? Lancaster seldom spoke of his private life, clinging to a dignified silence as headlines swirled. But in post-war America, the FBI was never far away. The Bureau, emboldened by the paranoid climate of the Cold War and the witch hunts of McCarthyism, took a keen interest in powerful cultural figures. For them, a celebrity's inner world was just another battleground of ideology and influence. Burt Lancaster's journey to those sunlit Hollywood beaches and secret FBI files began in the gritty streets of East Harlem, where he was born in 1913 into a working-class Irish immigrant family. His childhood was tough, overshadowed by financial worries and family struggles. The allure of escape came in the form of the Circus, a romantic fantasy for countless children, but one that Lancaster actually pursued. Along with his friend Nick Cravat, he formed a duo known as Lang and Cravat and joined the K-Brothers Circus. Swinging from horizontal bars, defying gravity, Lancaster came alive under the tense flickering lights. Yet, life under the big top was rarely profitable or stable. They often performed in burlesque clubs, interspersing their acrobatics between strip acts, scraping by on small tips and unpredictable wages. It was an unlikely proving ground for a future Hollywood legend, but it toughened him, forging a resilience he would need again and again. In 1939, fate dealt him a terrible blow. A performance mishap led to a badly infected finger. The doctor presented a grim choice: give up acrobatics or lose the finger. He chose to keep the finger, paying for it by abandoning the career that defined his youth. The circus, that dream of escape and freedom, vanished overnight. If not for the looming storm of World War II, perhaps Lancaster's life would have stagnated there, aimless and uncertain. Instead, the U.S. Army drafted him in 1942. The Special Services branch recognized some spark in him, something more than muscle and grace, and assigned him to entertain troops alongside star performers like Sammy Davis Jr. and Mickey Rooney. But at first, Lancaster's talents went untapped. He didn't dazzle the soldiers with his own show. Instead, he found himself humbly turning pages for a pianist, a far cry from the spotlight of the center ring. Yet even that seemingly menial task mattered. It placed him in Europe and North Africa, lands scarred by war and filled with opportunities for reinvention. Here was a man at a crossroads who had already lost one dream. Perhaps the world had something else in store. In Italy, everything changed again. Norma Anderson, a stenographer stationed abroad, noticed the striking man hovering near the piano. She asked a friend to arrange a blind date, and soon enough Lancaster was smitten. She saw more than just a handsome face. Perhaps she sensed a wounded heart, eager for stability and understanding. They fell in love swiftly. Two Americans in a foreign land made brutal and chaotic by war. It was a union forged amid global conflict, sealed in private exchanges rather than public fanfare. But what followed after the war ended was a journey infinitely more complex than any simple love story. As Lancaster rose through Hollywood's ranks, propelled by chance opportunities and raw talent, he refused to be boxed in. He embraced roles that challenged the era's masculine ideals. The camera loved him as he splashed in the surf with Deborah Kerr, making From Here to Eternity immortal and scandalizing a public unaccustomed to men flaunting their bodies without shame. As he climbed higher, enjoying fame and wealth, the rumors multiplied. Hollywood was a pressure cooker in the 1950s, where whispered suspicions of sexual orientation or political leanings could destroy a career. McCarthyist paranoia infected the studios and quiet surveillance became a new norm. The FBI took notice of Lancaster's defiance, his rumored private parties, and his refusal to behave as expected. They opened files, made notes, and asked questions designed to expose every personal detail he had tried to keep hidden. Whether the actor realized how closely they followed him or not, their presence loomed, an invisible audience recording his every move. None of this was known to the public at the time. Lancaster himself rarely addressed the swirling whispers about his sexuality or alleged communist sympathies. He understood that in Hollywood, silence was often safer than rebuttal. After his death in 1994, as the decades passed and old secrets lost their sting, the FBI files emerged, revealing that they had indeed monitored him closely. Yet no definitive proof of the darkest rumors materialized. Just a paper trail of curiosity, distrust, and the era's signature paranoia. In hindsight, these revelations lend a new understanding to Lancaster's tight-lipped demeanor. He had navigated a minefield of social and political taboos, careful never to give the industry or the public ammunition against him. Burt Lancaster's life was a kaleidoscope of transformations. A Harlem boy who joined the circus, an acrobat forced into a new path by a cruel twist of fate, a soldier turning pages in wartime, a Hollywood titan who challenged the norms of masculinity, and a private man who knew too well the cost of honesty in an era obsessed with conformity. His stories and secrets, once guarded, now live on in declassified documents, in pages yellowed by time, and in the films that still flicker across screens worldwide. He was no simple hero. He was a man shaped by hardship, ambition, and the pressure of a watchful society. His silence, once perplexing, now speaks volumes about the world he inhabited and the delicate line he walked between public adoration and private peril. If you enjoyed this deeper look into the complicated life of one of Hollywood's brightest stars, consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories that strip away the illusions to reveal the human truths behind the legends. Lancaster returned from Italy with Norma Anderson, and for a brief moment he genuinely considered leaving acting behind. It was as though the entire trajectory of his life, the acrobatics, the war service, the chance meetings, had delivered him here, only for him to contemplate a quieter future. But Hollywood had other ideas. In a twist straight out of a movie scene, Lancaster's life changed again inside an elevator. He was on his way to meet Anderson when a producer happened to share the same cramped space. The producer, sizing up this tall, striking figure, spontaneously invited Lancaster to audition for a Broadway role. It might have seemed improbable, even absurd, but nothing about Lancaster's path had ever been conventional. He accepted without hesitation. Lancaster's intensity and presence, the kind that once galvanized circus audiences, now transfixed the stage director. Word spread swiftly. Here was someone with uncommon charisma and a raw magnetism that begged to be harnessed by bigger stages and brighter lights. Another producer noticed him and offered a chance at Hollywood, a realm Lancaster had never stepped foot in, yet was all too ready to conquer. Most newcomers would have been grateful just to secure a minor contract, but Lancaster, never short on ambition, immediately pressed for more. He didn't want to be just another contract player scrambling for scraps. He wanted power, input, and creative control. He asked right there at the threshold of his film career whether he could eventually produce as well as act. This was audacious, especially for someone who hadn't even made a single movie in Tinseltown. Miraculously, the producer agreed to a deal. If Lancaster proved himself as an actor, he would earn the right to produce his own projects 5 years later. The deal came with a caveat. He had to deliver a performance that would leave no doubt about his star potential. That test arrived swiftly. His first film, The Killers, 1946, would not only launch Burt Lancaster's screen career, but also boost his co-star Ava Gardner into the Hollywood stratosphere. The film was a sensation, critically acclaimed, commercially successful, and lauded as an instant classic. Audiences were spellbound by Lancaster's quiet intensity, the brooding strength he brought to the screen. In a town crowded with hopefuls, Lancaster emerged a bona fide star overnight. He had never played a supporting role in Hollywood before The Killers, and after this explosive debut he would never have to. His name was inked into the pantheon of leading men, and the promise of producing his own films now felt within reach. He had leapt through Hollywood's first hoop with astonishing grace. Yet as the cameras rolled and Lancaster's fame swelled, personal complications began to surface. Life had a habit of intruding just when dreams looked most attainable. While filming The Killers, Lancaster received news from Norma Anderson that would rattle his carefully arranged plans. She was pregnant. In the mid-1940s, Hollywood studio contracts and personal reputations were tightly bound to moral codes, both real and imagined. A child out of wedlock could shatter a rising star's image, invite gossip columnists to feed, and provoke studio heads to withdraw their golden handshakes. Lancaster, who had clawed his way from the circus to the screen, now stood at a crossroads. He considered paying for an abortion, a grim and clandestine solution that many in Hollywood's shadows resorted to during that era. He had enough money to do it quietly, but Anderson refused. Her religious faith stood firm, and she would not entertain the idea of ending the pregnancy. This stalemate threw Lancaster into turmoil. His star was ascending. His ambitions were set on producing films and carving out a piece of Hollywood's power structure. Yet this scandalous situation threatened to derail his momentum. To the public, he was fast becoming an icon of masculine allure, someone who could command attention simply by stepping into frame. To Hollywood insiders, he had just proven he had what it took to carry a film, to make money, to matter. If this pregnancy became known, would they see him as reckless, irresponsible, or morally compromised at a time when moral clauses were often tucked into actors' contracts? Might the studios distance themselves, seeking more wholesome heroes who wouldn't rock the boat or raise eyebrows? Lancaster's past had never been defined by adherence to norms. He had walked away from the circus, turned pages in war-torn Europe for a pianist instead of performing himself, and demanded producing rights long before he had the leverage to justify such demands. Now, facing perhaps the greatest personal dilemma of his young career, he would have to decide how much he was willing to risk for the life he carried inside him. Not just the life he had built on screen, but the actual new life growing far from the public's gaze. He had come so far, and yet here he stood, trapped between the ruthless demands of an industry that prized appearances and a moral reckoning that no amount of stardom could avoid. What Lancaster did next would shape not only his personal legacy but the trajectory of his career. In Hollywood's golden age, where rumor spread faster than fire and reputations were as fragile as celluloid, every choice reverberated. The question remained, would he choose public image and professional ascension over personal responsibility? Or would he embrace the consequences of fatherhood and risk the carefully curated narrative the studios were beginning to weave for him? For a man who had already defied gravity under circus tents and spotlight beams, the next step would require a different kind of courage. Whether he realized it or not, this moment would be as pivotal as any scene he'd ever perform, forcing him to confront not just Hollywood's expectations, but the private moral landscape that would define him as more than just a star on the rise. Lancaster remained under contract with Universal Pictures, and the studio executives, fixated on preserving their star's pristine image, had little patience for the scandal of an illegitimate child. To solve the problem, they took the reins and staged a hurried wedding ceremony in Arizona for Lancaster and Norma Anderson. Such interference only deepened Lancaster's resolve to break free from the stifling studio system. He yearned to carve out his own destiny. If Hollywood insisted on controlling his private life, at least he could gain some autonomy behind the camera. It was that restless energy that drove him to become one of the earliest actor-producers, a status that put him outside the usual constraints of his contemporaries. From the start, his foray into producing stirred up controversy. His first production, Kiss the Blood Off My Hands, sparked alarm before audiences even settled into their seats. The title alone was enough to rattle censors and small-town moralists from the United States to Canada and Australia, who balked at such explicit violence advertised on their theater marquees. Under pressure, Lancaster rebranded the film as The Unafraid in more sensitive regions, and in the end, the movie did reasonably well at the box office. But more importantly, it proved that a star could exert creative influence over his own projects. At a time when most actors were powerless cogs in Hollywood's machinery, forced to accept whatever roles the studios assigned, Lancaster demonstrated a daring independence. He was not simply another handsome face. He was a force to be reckoned with, at once reshaping his own image and forging a path that others would follow. Yet newfound power can go to one's head, and by 1952 on the set of The Crimson Pirate, Lancaster's behavior was making waves of a different sort. Cast and crew found him overbearing, crude, and nearly impossible to manage. He threw his weight around and tested the patience of everyone present. It was as if he were exploring the boundaries of his newfound authority, pushing to see just how far he could go before someone pushed back. As if that weren't enough, a more insidious danger lurked offset, the paranoia of the McCarthy era, when Washington's politicians and the FBI sniffed out supposed communist influences in every dark corner of Hollywood. The film's dialogue drew unwanted scrutiny from none other than FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. A particular speech Lancaster delivered in The Crimson Pirate praised the dignity of the common working man, and Hoover interpreted it as veiled propaganda, a subtle endorsement of communist ideals. It didn't matter that Lancaster might have simply been giving voice to a romantic notion of liberty and fairness. In the eyes of the Bureau, the line crossed into treacherous territory. Since Lancaster not only starred in the film but also had a hand in producing it, he became a marked man in FBI files, tainted by suspicion. From that moment, the Bureau kept Lancaster in their sights, and that grim label as a potential communist stuck to him like tar, shadowing him for the rest of his life and beyond. Meanwhile, despite having married Anderson in that hasty, studio-orchestrated ceremony, rumors swirled about Lancaster's personal life. Stories spread of his many dalliances, flirtations with makeup artists, production assistants, and even alleged encounters with the iconic Marlene Dietrich. His powerful allure was legendary. Women fell easily under his spell, and whisperings suggested that soon everyone, women across America, and likely more than a few men, would be charmed by him. The reason lay just ahead, in a scene that would become the cinematic lightning bolt of 1953. That year, Lancaster starred in From Here to Eternity. It was here that he filmed a moment destined for immortality, a scene that would forever mark him as more than just a handsome leading man. On that Hawaiian beach, as waves crashed and the camera captured raw sensuality like never before, Burt Lancaster rose to a new level of stardom. This was not just acting, it was alchemy. In defiance of the moral guardians and suspicious FBI agents, Lancaster etched his name into Hollywood's history, standing at the crossroads of scandal, ambition, and art. His journey was fraught with danger and intrigue, but it also yielded one of the most enduring images of passion ever set to film. If this story has captivated you, consider giving it a like and subscribing for more explorations into the lives that formed the secret spine of Hollywood's golden age. Lancaster kissed Deborah Kerr in Hawaii while the waves crashed over them, creating an iconic cinematic moment that left audiences breathless and forever etched his name into Hollywood lore. But that famous beach scene in From Here to Eternity almost never happened as we know it. Originally, the script envisioned a far more conventional approach. The actors standing upright, delivering their lines and sharing a chaste embrace. At the last minute, however, it was Lancaster who suggested taking the passion down to the sand. Director Fred Zinnemann immediately saw the potential. They rolled cameras at the shoreline, with surf swirling around their entwined bodies, and the result would become one of the most daring, sensuous scenes of the era, shattering 1950s taboos and elevating Lancaster and Kerr to immortal status. Lancaster understood that every detail mattered in creating this unforgettable image. He wanted the kiss to look authentic, and he also wanted to display a physique that rivaled the Greek gods. Between takes, he jogged on the spot and knocked out push-ups to keep his muscles pumped. He even manscaped before cameras rolled, an unusual act for a leading man at the time, a sign of just how determined he was to make this scene perfect. Rumors later swirled about whether sparks flew off screen too. According to Lancaster, something indeed happened between him and Kerr, though Kerr's version was that while there may have been a flicker of mutual attraction, it went no further than a professional chemistry. We may never know the full truth, but the electric tension captured on film leaves little doubt that this was no ordinary Hollywood kiss. Yet not all moments on the From Here to Eternity set were filled with such effortless magnetism. Lancaster found himself intimidated by his co-star Montgomery Clift, an actor of extraordinary depth and subtlety. In their first scene together, you can actually see Lancaster's hands trembling, a rare sign of nerves from a man who once hung from trapezes and defied gravity before thousands. Lancaster's anxiety may have fueled some of his more difficult behavior during production, and it eventually wore down even the famously even-tempered Zinnemann. One day, after too many retakes and too much back and forth, the frustrated director finally snapped at Lancaster to go screw himself, an outburst nearly unheard of from the measured Zinnemann, but perhaps inevitable given the pressures mounting on all sides. Their efforts paid off in critical recognition. From Here to Eternity earned Lancaster an Oscar nomination for Best Actor, and it also garnered a nod for Clift. Ironically, being nominated together may have hurt both men's chances, splitting the votes of Academy members who admired the film's acting but couldn't choose between its two powerhouses. In the end, William Holden took home the statue for Stalag 17. Still, Lancaster's star continued to rise, and his growing influence as a producer started paying off handsomely. His production company scored a major triumph in 1955, with Marty starring Ernest Borgnine in the unlikeliest of heroic roles, an unassuming, ordinary man falling in love with an equally unglamorous partner. Marty proved that audiences could embrace human vulnerability and everyday struggles. The film won the Academy Award for Best Picture and the Palme d'Or at Cannes, one of the few to ever achieve this double feat. Lancaster, though intimately involved in bringing the film to the screen, declined to appear in it. His reasoning? Cynical and image-obsessed. Who wants to see a movie about two ugly people? It was a cutting remark, betraying the vanity and commercial instincts that lurked behind his innovative spirit. By 1960, however, Lancaster had fully matured as an actor and was prepared to take on truly challenging roles. He played a charismatic con artist preacher in Elmer Gantry, delivering a performance so powerful it cut through the noise and doubt. Despite facing titans like Laurence Olivier and Spencer Tracy, Lancaster finally seized the Best Actor Oscar. After a hesitant start in Hollywood, this was his moment of full vindication, a confirmation that he was no mere pretty face or muscular torso, but a performer capable of commanding the screen with profound emotional resonance. Yet, as his professional life soared, his personal life remained a labyrinth of lies and infidelity. His marriage to Norma Anderson was troubled from the start. Rumors of affairs followed him everywhere, involving makeup artists, production assistants, and even legends like Marlene Dietrich. According to Shelley Winters, in her 1980 autobiography, she had a 2-year affair with Lancaster while he remained married. Another memoir, by actor Farley Granger, added a dramatic twist. Granger claimed that while Lancaster was dating Winters, she overdosed on sleeping pills and booze. It was Lancaster and Granger who saved her life, rushing to get her help in a desperate last-minute intervention. Winters later ended the affair, but not for the reason one might expect. She supposedly discovered that Lancaster's wife was pregnant, and the idea that he was cheating on his mistress with his own wife proved too much. Winters could tolerate him straying when it was with her, but not with the woman he had actually married. She walked away, leaving Lancaster's tangled personal life even more complicated and morally ambiguous. If Winters had believed every rumor about Lancaster, she might have found other reasons to worry. In 1960, scandalous reports emerged about a secret Hollywood mansion raided by the authorities. It allegedly hosted wild parties that catered to gay men, complete with hidden cameras and attempts by photographers to snap compromising photos. Rumor had it that attendees included Rock Hudson, a high-ranking admiral, 250 Marines, and Burt Lancaster himself. Whether these stories were wholly accurate, partially fabricated, or inflated by gossip and paranoia, they only added to the mystique and controversy swirling around Lancaster's image. The star who once had to hide his out-of-wedlock child now found himself associated with a liberated underworld that could shock even the most jaded tabloids. In an era defined by strict morals and fear of deviance, these whispers could be as dangerous as any accusation of communism. Yet Lancaster was a man of contradictions. While he struggled with personal demons, he also demonstrated genuine courage and principle. He was a fierce advocate for civil rights. In 1963, during the filming of The Train in France, Lancaster learned about the March on Washington. Determined to stand on the right side of history, he overcame his fear of flying, secured leave from production, and traveled to Washington, D.C. to join the march. The next day he was back on set, but this brief break revealed another dimension to the man. Behind the Hollywood icon and tangled private life stood someone willing to risk his comfort to witness a pivotal moment in American history. Burt Lancaster's life and career were defined by extremes, dazzling successes and near-ruinous scandals, pioneering efforts in production, and petty vanity, moral stands against injustice and personal missteps behind closed doors. He soared in ways few Hollywood stars could imagine, yet he remained forever entangled in the era's moral, political, and social nets. Audiences loved him for his raw magnetism. Studios respected his audacity. The FBI eyed him with suspicion, and lovers and friends fell into and out of his orbit in complicated patterns. In the end, Lancaster was as conflicted and multifaceted as the century he inhabited, an emblem of both its dreams and its failings, an enigma to be unraveled, and a star whose light refused to dim. Lancaster's fear of flying never stood a chance against his commitment to social justice. He proved it in 1963 by attending the March on Washington, and he did it again a decade later. In 1973, when President Richard Nixon famously compiled his enemies list of high-profile figures he deemed threats, Lancaster's outspoken support for civil rights and minority causes landed him a spot. He found himself in good company. Others included Jane Fonda, Paul Newman, and the formidable EGOT winner, Barbra Streisand. While some on the list felt chilled by the implications, Lancaster seemed to wear his inclusion as a badge of honor, confirming that he had never merely been a pretty face. He had convictions, and he would not shrink from them. Hollywood, meanwhile, was evolving in strange directions. Disaster films became a lucrative trend, with studios lining up to produce star-studded spectacles. In the pioneering effort Airport, Lancaster starred alongside Dean Martin and Jacqueline Bisset, standing tall above the film's title and pocketing an extraordinary 10% of the hefty profits. Financially, it was a triumph. But artistically, Lancaster was less than impressed. He later dismissed Airport as the worst piece of junk ever made. His candor, though biting, revealed a man who valued substance over box office success, even when he personally profited. As the years passed, Lancaster's star refused to dim, though he recognized the changing tides in his own image. At 63, he declared himself too old to be a romantic lead, an admission that at first glance seemed to signal the twilight of his leading man days. Hollywood, however, had a different opinion. In 1980, he took on the role of a world-weary gangster, courting a much younger Susan Sarandon in Atlantic City. Critics took note of his nuanced performance, and the industry honored him with numerous accolades, including the Los Angeles and New York Film Critics Awards and an Oscar nomination. He ultimately lost that statuette to Henry Fonda, but the nomination reaffirmed that Lancaster, now gray at the temples, was still capable of commanding respect and admiration on screen. True to his long history of activism and empathy, Lancaster also found himself fighting a different kind of battle in the 1980s. His friend Rock Hudson, once the epitome of the Hollywood leading man, had contracted AIDS, a diagnosis cloaked in stigma and fear at the time. Lancaster didn't flinch. He stood with Hudson, joining the fight against the disease. As Hudson's health declined, he entrusted Lancaster with a final poignant duty to deliver his last words to Hollywood. In front of a charged and emotional crowd, Lancaster recited Hudson's message of sorrow and hope, lending his voice to the struggle and heartbreak that had long been kept in the shadows. When Hudson passed, Lancaster was the only male celebrity to attend the funeral, a quiet testament to loyalty and compassion in an industry often accused of superficiality. But fate had more trials in store. After a coronary bypass operation, doctors likely advised Lancaster to rest, to recover slowly, to embrace the quiet life he had so often tried to outrun. Instead, within 6 months, he was back in front of the camera, co-starring with Margot Kidder and Ted Danson in the 1984 film Little Treasure. It was as if he refused to let his body's frailties dictate his destiny. He pressed onward, defying limits and defying time, just as he once defied the narrow roles and rigid studio systems of his early career. Burt Lancaster's final chapters were a remarkable tapestry of paradox. The former acrobat, who soared to Hollywood's highest peaks, but never hesitated to lash out at a cheap production. The heartthrob, who defied age and expectation to deliver some of his finest work in his later years. The advocate who appeared on an enemy list, curated by a U.S. president, yet remained unbowed and unapologetic. The friend who stood up at a time when AIDS ravaged the entertainment community, giving voice and dignity to a silent struggle. Even as his health faltered, he refused to yield, returning to work with the same restless energy that had defined his earlier decades. In the end, Lancaster was not simply a star defined by era, genre, or marquee billing. He emerged as something more complex, an enduring figure of contradictions who combined moral courage, artistic ambition, personal flaws, and unshakable resilience. If this deep dive into the layered and tumultuous journey of Burt Lancaster captured your imagination, consider giving this video a like and subscribing for more stories that look beyond the glossy surface of Hollywood's legends to uncover the human truths pulsing beneath. Even though he suffered from a chronic heart condition, Burt Lancaster stubbornly continued to appear in films and television, refusing to let age or infirmity strip him of his passion. At least that was the case until Hollywood's ruthless economics caught up with him. The industry that once celebrated his prowess now saw him as a costly liability. In 1988, he was all set to play the lead in Old Gringo, a high-profile project that could have prolonged his relevance in a changing cinematic landscape. But as Columbia Pictures tallied up the increased insurance premiums required for a star of Lancaster's age and health, they balked. The bottom line won out. He was quietly cut from the picture, replaced by Gregory Peck, another legend, but one deemed less financially risky. Still, not every studio treated him like a line item on a ledger. Universal offered him a return to the spotlight in the baseball fantasy field of dreams alongside Kevin Costner. Here Lancaster would embody an aging doctor, evoking a gentle nostalgia that matched the film's dreamlike tone. Yet, even on this friendly set, subtle signs emerged that time had taken its toll. During production, he mistook co-star Timothy Busfield for an assistant and began sending him on errands. Only later, as they faced each other in a scene, did Lancaster realize his error. Field of Dreams became his final cinematic role, a twilight performance that quietly encapsulated both his enduring charisma and the inevitable decline that comes with age. His life off-screen continued to evolve, providing its own share of dramatic twists. At 77, he married Susan Scherer, a television production coordinator nearly 3 decades his junior. Their relationship lasted until the end of his days, demonstrating that even a man who had lived through Hollywood's golden age and carried its scars could still find a measure of companionship. But that end approached sooner than anyone hoped. In 1980, while visiting a friend in Orange County, Lancaster suffered a stroke. The once indomitable presence who had soared above circus crowds and defied studio bosses was now forced into the quiet confines of a hospital room. He emerged from treatment a changed man, withdrawing into the sanctuary of his condo, receiving only a select few visitors, chief among them his new wife. 4 years later, in 1994, he passed away with her by his side, closing the final chapter on a life that had been defined by ambition, controversy, and reinvention. In 2000, 6 years after his death, the FBI released a trove of documents that painted a darker, more complex picture of Burt Lancaster's secret world. Back in the 1950s, when J. Edgar Hoover wielded the FBI as a tool of political and cultural intimidation, Lancaster had been placed under intense surveillance. Hoover's files portrayed him as a man of dangerous proclivities, affairs with other men, predatory behavior, and a covert life hidden behind the public persona. Whether these allegations held any truth is a subject of heated debate. Hoover had long been known to fabricate or exaggerate evidence against those he deemed threats, often mixing political paranoia with moralistic crusades. To Hoover, Lancaster was more than an actor. He was a suspected communist sympathizer, an advocate for civil rights and minority causes that Hoover considered radical. The line between fact and fiction, justice and smear blurs in these old reports. The only certainty is that Lancaster's private life intrigued and unsettled those who attempted to police cultural norms. Outside the FBI's realm of paranoia, rumors continued to swirl in Hollywood's whispered corridors. Some say Lancaster's strict fitness regimen, his preference for male secretaries, and his frequent visits to Rock Hudson's home, where, according to scandalous whispers, male-only parties often descended into sexual revelry, hinted at a sexuality he carefully concealed. In a time when being openly gay could end a career or invite blackmail, maintaining a veneer of heterosexual respectability was practically a matter of survival. Yet, as decades passed, some have argued that men like Lancaster and Hudson quietly laid groundwork for a world in which stars could one day step forward, proclaiming their truth without fear. Their secret lives, known to insiders and buried in coded gossip, may have helped crack the door open, just a fraction, for future generations to live more honestly. Hollywood has always been adept at guarding its mysteries. Even now, complete certainty about Lancaster's personal truth eludes us. The era in which he rose to fame was governed by rigid studio contracts, morality clauses, and the silent understanding that certain desires were never to be spoken aloud. Much of what we hear today about parties, secret affairs, locked away FBI files, comes through second-hand accounts, memoirs heavy with agenda, and documents compiled by men like Hoover, who hunted subversion under every rock. The truth, if it can be called that, remains elusive. What survives beyond all doubt are Lancaster's on-screen triumphs, his magnetic performances, his willingness to challenge the studio system, and his refusal to be pigeonholed into a single type of character made him a vital figure in American cinema. Whether kissing Deborah Kerr in Crashing Surf, dueling with Montgomery Clift's intensity, or playing an aging dreamer in a field of ghosts and baseball legends, his artistry remains intact. Historians may argue, fans may debate, and rumors may never fully dissipate, but the legacy he carved into film endures as a testament to complexity, courage, and an unquenchable spirit. If you've enjoyed this deeper look into the tangled life and times of Burt Lancaster, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more explorations into the lives that shaped Hollywood's past, often hidden behind its brightest lights and darkest shadows.